Here we go, guys. Welcome in. You are watching State of the Family Courts. It is Thursday, September 16th, and I am your host, Mark Reel. And tonight we are here with our special guest, California attorney David Pizarro. David, how are we doing tonight?
Awesome, Mark. I'm so glad to be here. I'm really excited about talking to the Fathers' Rights Movement.
Thank you. Thank you. So for those of you that don't know who David is, he's someone who over 20 years now of representing men in family court in California, and has been involved in a lot of different things that have helped move fathers' rights forward. So, David, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself, a little bit of background for the people.
Happy to. You know, it's great to be here. You know, I'm really excited to see the Fathers' Rights Movement putting out a podcast like this and getting back on Facebook Lives and really engaging the community. It's really exciting because there's so much need for dads to actually band together and find the support to really get what they need going into court. And so often what I found, because I've been practicing law for 20 plus years now, and the majority of that is dealing with men in family courts. And the one thing that I found is the majority of men get into a relationship and they lose all of their friends and they lose their social network. And then whether it's 2 years or 5 years or 15 years down the road, all of a sudden they're going through a breakup and they're fighting over their kid and they're emotionally distraught because their world's blown up. They've been cut off at the knees with no money, no access to their kids, and they've been kicked out of their house. And they realize, like, oh, crap, I have no friends. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know who to talk to. And so those emotions just get buried and stuffed. And then it comes out sideways, and it comes out in anger or a snarky comment that gets used against you going into court in a custody battle. So it's just this mess of like emotions and anger and law and strategy. And so when I see like the Fathers' Rights Movement getting their act together and really coming together as a community and building something for men, it's really exciting to me because when I represent a guy, if he has his act together emotionally, it's so much easier and better going in court than if they're just emotional and scared and angry.
So, yeah, definitely. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
So, tonight be a little bit of an interesting episode, I guess you could say. David and I obviously both representing men in Southern California. So we'll do our normal thing here and hop into the state-specific rules, the state-specific laws, and what we see really on the ground in the state of California. So to start things off, I always cite the National Parents Organization, their grades of the state laws. California grades out as a D, one of the worst in the country in terms of statutorily how the laws are written. So I'll start out with this because I always find this interesting. So you've been at this for 20 years. What have you seen? What is different now than, say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago?
So when I started in 1999, realistically, we'd get a divorce case in and I'd get a call from the other side, or I'd call the other side and I'd be like, hey, yeah, I'm coming into this case. Why don't we work out a discovery plan and do some exchanges of tax returns and credit card statements and come up with a strategy to get this case over with and get this family kind of separated. Mm-hmm. And over the course of 20 years, that has gone from what was originally a fairly civilized process of two lawyers representing their clients, trying to work in the best interest of the family, to global thermonuclear war out the gate. And I attribute this to the expansion of domestic violence. And that I trace all the way back to the death of Nicole Brown Simpson. And that was a real watershed moment in the history of domestic violence in our country, and certainly in California. It engaged the domestic violence lobby and the domestic violence shelters to get new law, to do something about this. And this is where bad law comes out of bad cases. And what ended up happening was we went from one extreme of, unless there's like a real physical violence, there's no domestic violence, it's a family matter. The courts don't do anything, cops don't do anything. And it's expanded now to the other extreme where 20 years later, it's you're not letting me know exactly how you're spending every dollar, and that's coercive control. And I feel like I'm being financially abused in this relationship. So I want a restraining order, and I want custody of the kids, and I want to kick you out of the house, and I want rebuttable presumption of the kids under 3044, and it's global thermonuclear war. Let's cut you off at the knees. It's divorce by ambush. And so that's the progression I have seen from, to use a colloquial term that would be politically incorrect, but fuck, I don't care. It was a gentleman's game. People acted with civility. And 20 years later, there is very little civility. It is global thermonuclear war. Here's my 500 discovery requests, and I'm kicking you out of the house.
Yeah, I think that and we talked about this before before we came live. I know a good chunk of my practice is domestic violence restraining orders. I would say that probably at least 70% of my clients have either had a domestic violence restraining order filed against them, or they come to me and they've already had one granted. And I give men in the initial consultation, I tell them, like, legitimately in the state of California, you can send a couple of mean texts and end up slapped with a domestic violence restraining order.
Particularly with this new definition of coercive control as grounds for a domestic violence restraining order, I don't even know what coercive control means. I'm fluent as a lawyer in English, and I don't understand what that means. Because coercive control, is that like when one partner starts dressing really sexy and gets the other partner interested, but then withholds sex because they want to get something from the other partner? That sounds very coercive and controlling to me, but is that going to qualify? I don't know. I mean, it's a wild west. And the other thing that I think is really sad, that I think more men need to be aware of, that I have been beating the drum on for 15 years now, is men need to man up and get restraining orders themselves. I would say the vast bulk of the men that I have represented who have been painted as the perpetrators were also victims. That frequently the reason why they're perpetrating is because they were victims and they were victims and they were victims and they were victims. And then they snapped and they said something stupid, or they did something stupid, or they threw a bottle against a wall, and bam, you're now the abuser. I'm taking control, kicking out of the house.
Yeah, I have a mentor who's a mental health professional who he talks about there's studies out there that a lot of times men are victims of physical domestic violence upwards of 15 times before they report. Now, on the other hand, women are usually victims of domestic violence 5 to 6 times. So obviously an issue both ways, but a lot of times men keep their mouths shut. And as soon as something happens, the woman runs to the courthouse, and the temporary restraining order almost always gets granted. I think I always have to tell clients that come in with TROs, like, I mean, if an attorney filed it, in all likelihood, it's going to get granted.
Yeah, I don't know what you call it. In our office, we call it the magic words. Yeah. Do you know the magic words? Because if you know the magic words and you put them in the declaration, that thing's going to get granted. Yeah. Because no judge is going to run the risk that, oh, I didn't grant it and somebody got killed or attacked, and they had the opportunity for protection, and the judge denied it.
Yeah,
they don't want
that's exactly what I tell clients. I mean, it's the safe play to just go ahead and grant it. You throw some vague allegations in there, and you're going to have to go 3 weeks without seeing your kids. And that hearing in 3 weeks is going to be essentially fighting for your parental rights life, in a sense, because of what 3044 does.
Totally. And the one that I think so many men really to quote George Bush, misunderestimate, is the phrase when they have a little girl that mom will put in, I am afraid dad is fingering the baby when he's changing her diaper. Bam, that's an immediate guarantee. We're issuing a restraining order. We're going to call DFS. We're doing the investigation. The social worker is going to be involved, and God help you.
Yeah.
And it's all it is. I mean, if you really break it down, the important part there is the words, I'm afraid. Like, that's it. That's all it takes. And you can put anything after that, and boom, it's going to get issued.
Yeah, that I've seen that firsthand. I guess this talks to both of your points. I've had cases where it does get started with that domestic violence restraining order. You get to court, you end up having conversations with opposing counsel, and nobody really wants to litigate anything. You come to a deal, and then I had an instance recently where the woman then went out and fired her attorney, and the new attorneys came in and filed a new restraining order on top of the one that we'd already pulled the children out of because it was just hearsay allegations.
Yeah.
So it was essentially the woman ended up going fishing for an attorney who was willing to make it litigious.
Sure. Because there is that. There is very much that element of, I want a bulldog attorney to defend my rights, to go in there and beat them up and get me everything I want. And the sad part is that if you're the man on the other side of that, you're along for the ride, dude. Like, I would love to tell you that, like, oh, I can go toe to toe with them. Yeah, I can go toe to toe with them. Doesn't mean we're not going to have the fight. I can't shut down the other side when they want to fight.
I tell clients it takes two to tango. Like, your best option is for us to negotiate a deal, is for the parents to make decisions, not the judge to make decisions. But at the end of the day, if both parties aren't willing to play, you're going to have to go in front of the judge for what could be every little thing.